It's interesting how when we're listening to news or we're trying to follow a particular story of what's happening in society around us, it's the bad news that captures our attention. We seem almost like we're hardwired as human beings to dwell upon the suffering of others or even to look at our own suffering and to just stick in that space for a long time. You might be in that position yourself, having gone through a time of grief, having gone through maybe a time of bereavement, or even something much deeper in terms of pain in your life. If that's you, well, this message is something that you need to contemplate. My name is Kwame Rubadiri, and I'd like us to discuss the topic, great faithfulness. And you're watching CITAM Church Online. There's an entire book in the Bible that's devoted to sharing and pouring out, venting pain and suffering and anguish and all the questions one can think of about why bad things are happening. It's the Book of Lamentations. It's actually a series of poems that have been put together. But those poems are actually based on real life circumstances that happened in the life of the nation of Israel. For a long time, they were very comfortable in their lives. The nation was doing well. It was at peace. There was prosperity, especially during the reign of King Solomon. And then as they began to become very sort of comfortable in their ways of life, they began to compromise. They began to worship other idols. They began to do what other nations were doing. And God warned them that this would only lead them down a path of destruction and exile. But they ignored the warnings and they ended up paying the price. And the poems start talking about how life used to be so good, and now suddenly this terrible period of suffering, loss, death, and exile, and a complete damage of reputation. And as the poet begins to pour out this pain, he begins to pour out this anguish, right in the middle, in the third chapter, towards the end of the third chapter, it's almost as if a ray of hope shines through. We've been hearing news of some terrible things that have been happening in our nation here in Kenya, whether it's young people being burned in a school, young people taking their lives, and bringing such pain and devastation to families. These things trouble us, and they make us think about how terrible things have been and continue to be for so many in our society. Is there a reason to hope? And this passage of scripture provides us with one. This is what the writer of Lamentations, the poet in Lamentations, says in verse 21, 22, and 23. In verse 21, he says, and let me back up a little bit to verse 20. It says that I will remember them and my soul is downcast within me, recalling all the terrible things that have happened. And verse 21, he says, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Verse 22, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Because of the Lord's great love for us, we are not consumed. I want to remind you, as I've had to remind myself on other occasions when things have been really difficult, is that this is not the end. This is not where everything collapses, because we're surrounded by God's great love. And because of his faithfulness, we can be sure that we will overcome even this difficulty, even this pain, and be ushered on into a time and into a space of God's great love. It was about 8 years ago, yesterday, we commemorated my father's birthday, and he's late. He's gone to be with the Lord. I went to be with the Lord about 8 years ago. And yesterday, just thinking about how we miss him and how his absence still brings a sense of grief and loss into our hearts. But knowing that we're here because God has led us all this way, he has kept us, he's watched over us and still provided for us, and still helped us to cherish the memory of the passing of a dear parent. So I want to tell you and to let you know, those of you who are going through a time of difficulty and pain, because of God's great love for you and for all of us. This is not the end. We are not consumed. We have a hope in him. And I pray that that will be your portion this week. God bless you.